So here we are for a review of the in brief section from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraphs 413 to 421. This is really focused on the fall and on original sin. And so we need a little map that's helpful just to think about the overall paradigm. You've got the in the garden and the out of the garden, right? And I like to put a little line in here just to help remind myself of the kinds of things that we're thinking of, right? This line would be the fall. And we said there were a number of things about in the garden that were important. This is the human who's created in the image and likeness of God. This is where we are made male and female. And we notice that tradition uses this language. We have an original holiness, an original justice. Often we'll speak of an original goodness. You might even think of an original virtue. That's where a lot of this is aimed. And among those things, we definitely have freedom and we have rationality. Those are all things that we observe if we read Genesis 1 and 2 very carefully. The complete creation is not complete until God has made male and female. In Genesis 1, there's no chance to even envision a human apart from masculinity and femininity, or no chance to envision a solitary human. And in Genesis 2, we get another meditation on this. There's a little bit of a what if humans were alone? And of course, immediately God says, it is not good to be alone. I'll make a helper, right? There are all these good, wonderful, beautiful things. This is how God has intended for us to be. Now, there's lots of debate about how long we would live, right? Would we be immortal, properly speaking, or would we continue to live by God's grace and never fall from it? I don't want to get too far stuck into the weeds on a number of those debates. They're important, but for now, what I want to note is that it's certainly the case that what happens after the fall, the bad things that come, like death and disease, these are not things that God created. These things are a result of the fall. And that's where the Catechism picks up, right? God did not make death. He does not delight in the death of the living. It was through the devil's envy that death entered the world. This actually, the Catechism 413, but it's reflecting on Old Testament literature from the Book of Wisdom. Now, it's not in Genesis 1 and 2, but we have this idea that involved in the fall of humans is also the fall of angels. Perhaps the fall of angels came prior to the fall of humans. Again, not narrated exactly in the first two books of Genesis, because we just encounter Satan tempting Eve there in Genesis 3, and Eve gives in to the temptation and offers the temptation to Adam, and Adam gives in to the temptation. And so both humans fall. Point being, we cannot blame death and disease on God. And we cannot blame all our problems, death and disease, simply on Satan, because we had freedom. And we used our freedom, really, we abused our freedom. And one of the main penalties of abusing our freedom is that, well, we're no longer free. Paul says we're bound in chains, we're captive, or we're slaves. That means we're in need of liberation, right? And part of our captivity is we don't get to choose, we will die. We don't get to choose, we are subject to disease. And part of what we need in liberation and our freedom is also liberation from death. Now you can see how the resurrection is the answer to all of this already. Notice that really all of these things actually map where there's a kind of correspondence. Masculinity and femininity, that shows up in the characteristic women will long for men, will be subject to men, and yet that will be the only way that we can reproduce. Men will be able to provide for themselves and their families only in toil. What was once pleasurable is now problematic. And so you might put the division between men and women, not diversity. The diversity was good, but now that we're opposed to each other, we're divided. There are correspondings you'll see in all of the sections of the Catechism here in brief. No longer are we just obviously holy, right? We are in need. We were always in need, dependent upon God, but now we're in need even to get out of our own brokenness, right? We are, in fact, broken. I don't want to say that we're fundamentally depraved or evil, but you'll notice we have this tendency towards evil. We tend to evil or bad or the wrong. Now, there's some technical language that's given here, but the map I find helpful just to say that more or less in every good category, how God makes us, we find a perverted category. There's something that's twisted in the out of the garden experience through the fall. All right, so 4:15, although set in a state of rectitude, enticed by the evil one, we abuse our freedom at the very start of our history. And so freedom was meant for love, and we used freedom for some personal prideful sense. As a result, human nature is weakened in all of its powers, subject to ignorance, subject to suffering, subject to the domination of death, and inclined to sin. Now, this inclination to sin, this has a technical name, and it's just the Latin word for desire, concupiscence. Concupiscence. I'm having a blank on how to spell a word there. All right. So the concupiscence tendency towards evil. That's important because we're not going to come out and say directly that we're evil, right? We didn't change from being good to being evil all told. Instead, we change from tending towards good, being created good, to having to struggle, tending towards evil. Or, as we often hear in the New Testament, there are kind of two wills within me, two desires within me. One to do good, one to do bad. And we're stuck in the middle. Now, there's another question about this whole paradigm. And the question is really something like this. Given the fall, given original sin here, and the original sin is, of course, just the first. We've got a couple of questions. Does original sin as a name refer only to what's in Genesis 3, right? The first sin? Or does it also refer to these other things where we're talking about, like this map, right? And I'm telling you, it means both, but I think it's really silly when people try to separate it. So sometimes people will say, like, original sin is not in the Bible. It's like, well, original sin is in the Bible. You read Genesis 3, it's there, Adam and Eve, the first humans, they sinned. Then someone says, well, concupiscence as a technical term tending towards evil as a result of the fall. If that's what you mean by original sin, then they'll say, well, that's not in the Bible. And I'll give it to you that the word concupiscence is not in Genesis 3. But we have to think beyond the words. We have to think of the content, the meaning. And in the content and the meaning, there arises this question, right? Is Genesis 3, is this just a story, and it's meant to be something like a pattern or a type? In other words, Adam and Eve had their moment in the garden when they ate the forbidden fruit. Don't we all, right? Is it a story that works like that, a fairy tale that sets a kind of paradigm or a major image? Or is this actually like history and it's showing a cause? Is original sin a cause of future brokenness? Now, the Catholic answer is actually that it's both. So I have to admit, when I start life, particularly when I think about myself as a theologian, I have to admit that I already encounter myself as broken, and that may be the result of a long string of events that I don't remember, I don't know, or even, that I may not have chosen exactly for myself. Now, don't get wigged out. You didn't choose who your parents were, right? Like, lots of choices in that sense are made without you directly choosing them. The beautiful understanding of original sin in Catholicism is that it grabs us where we are and it says, but I have an explanation for that. And the explanation is the very first humans made a mistake. The very first humans missed the mark. The very first humans sinned. That sets a pattern. Each of us will follow in their footsteps, but it already changes the condition. But it doesn't change our original creation. It does not change that before original sin, we had original goodness, original holiness. All right, so this, in essence, is always our fundamental bit. And when we talk about all the things that follow from original sin, we're talking about perversions of a prior good. Or the way this often shows up in folk music and country music, there ain't no dark till something shines. There must already be a light before the light can be obscured. And the Catholic reflection is that the light, the goodness, creation in the image of God is prior to original sin and fallenness. Right, so God's not responsible for death and disease. In essence, we are. The fall of at least the rest of creation is wrapped up in the human fall. Other suffering happens because we, who are at the height of creation, fell. We who have freedom abused our freedom. We're in this together, even if there's a characteristic masculine and feminine way to fail and to give in to temptation and to tempt others. Even if there's a characteristic way for men and women to suffer, we're in this together. And then the idea that this original sin is a cause leads to some technical terms. I'll just call attention to them and then finish the reflections for this brief video. The technical terms that original sin is transmitted along with nature by propagation, not by imitation. Those are words from the Council of Trent. By propagation, not by imitation, which is to say, sometimes we think, a 5-year-old is perfectly innocent and has not committed her original sin. It's not until she's 7 or 8 that she'll make her first sin. Now, whatever the truth of that situation is, maybe you're not fully capable of sinning until you're fully developed and responsible for yourself. Okay, but the idea that it's by propagation means that even the newborn is already part of a broken world, a world which has fallen due to other humans, namely all the way back to Adam and Eve. All right, so original sin then is a universal condition for humans in history after the fall. That really sets the stage for the universal victory, or the sense in which Christ is the universal Savior, because it's Christ who overcomes particular sin and original sin. It's Christ who redeems everything. Now, we'll close with one final image about that, and that is that if we have in the garden where Adam and Eve are, and we think about that natural line, at some point we fell, right? And we're starting to lead the fallen life. This would be the break, the fall, in the garden here, out of the garden here. What we see is that we need some help, we need some assistance to get back to our natural line, right? And grace offers that. But grace offers a second thing in the out of the garden. It's not just a return to the status in the garden, but grace actually gets us somewhere beyond. And so we have a grace that restores us to human nature, but we have a grace, particularly in Christ and the resurrection, which gets us beyond our nature.